All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We're going to be diving into something today pretty heavy actually. It's this whole thing with deportations under the Trump administration. It seems like they're really pushing to ramp things up. And well, they're running into a lot of pushback, especially from the courts.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head there. This whole situation, it's a prime example of that constant tug of war you see in government. The different branches, they're always testing the limits, seeing how far they can go. And in this case, immigration, well, that's become the battleground.
It definitely feels like it. And you know what's fascinating is we've got this set of details coming out of the Indian Express, some really interesting reporting that shows just how intense this conflict is getting. What's really grabbed my attention, honestly, is this law that Trump's team is digging up. It's called the Alien Enemies Act. And get this, it dates back to 1798.
Wow, 1798, that's older than the Constitution itself, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. It's just wild to me that they're reaching that far back into the legal toolbox, you know? And the courts, well, they're not just sitting back and letting it slide.
Right, and one of the biggest moments that shows just how high the tension is here is this whole thing with Trump going after that chief judge, publicly calling him out, using some pretty harsh language, even talking about impeachment. That's not something you see every day.
Yeah, I mean, calling a judge a troublemaker and an agitator, that's definitely not holding back. And you know what? Even Chief Justice Roberts, he felt the need to step in and say something. I mean, it's not every day that the head of the Supreme Court makes a public statement like that, rebuking the president. He basically said, look, impeachment, that's not a tool you just whip out because you don't like a judge's ruling.
That was a pretty clear message, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Roberts isn't one to get involved in these kind of public spats usually. So for him to fitch up like that, it really underlines the seriousness of this whole clash between the branches of government.
It really does. It's like, okay, things are getting serious here. But all right, let's back up a little bit and talk about this Alien Enemies Act, the AEA, because that's what really kicked all this off. The Trump administration decides to use this super old law to deport a bunch of people. We're talking 238 men allegedly part of this Venezuelan gang, Aragua. They shipped them off to a maximum security prison in El Salvador.
238 people, all based on a law from the 1700s.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's raising so many eyebrows, right? So what was the original purpose of this AEA? What was it meant for, and why is it causing such a huge uproar now?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because, like I said, this law is ancient. So help us understand why it was created and why using it now is so problematic.
Well, the main thing to understand is that the Alien Enemies Act, it was specifically designed for times of war, like officially declared wars. We're talking War of 1812, World War I, World War II, those kinds of situations.
It's some really serious stuff then.
Exactly. It was basically a way to identify and manage individuals living in the U.S. who were citizens of, well, enemy nations during those conflicts.
Okay, so it was meant to be used against actual enemies in a time of declared war. But, and this seems to be the big issue, we're not at war with Venezuela. We haven't declared war on them, so how can they even use this law?
That's exactly the point Chief Judge James Boasberg is making. He even said that using the AEA in this situation, it's incredibly troublesome, problematic, concerning. He really didn't hold back. His whole argument is, look, this law has always required a formal declaration of war. That's the trigger. And right now, we don't have that with Venezuela.
Right. So you've got the administration saying this is a national security issue, we got to act. And then you've got Judge Boasberg basically saying, hold on, you can't just ignore the law because it's convenient. It's a real clash.
It definitely is. And to make things even more complicated, there were even reports of planes with these deportees already on board that were in the air when Boasberg issued his emergency order to stop the deportations.
Oh, wow. So they were already on their way.
Yeah, and then the Justice Department, they jump in and argue, well, those planes, they're in international airspace now. They're outside of U.S. jurisdiction. You can't tell us what to do.
So it became this whole jurisdictional battle, too. Like, who has the authority here? Pretty wild.
Absolutely. And it really raises these fundamental questions about just how far judicial review can go, especially when you're dealing with these issues of immigration and national security.
Yeah, it gets really messy really quickly, but it doesn't end there, right?
Yeah.
Because on the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, they get involved as well.
Right. And they bring up a crucial point. Lee Gellert, one of their lawyers, he points out that even back in World War II, when we were talking about potentially deporting people, those individuals, they still got hearings.
They still had a chance to make their case, to defend themselves, right?
Exactly. And that's what Gellert's arguing is missing here. He's saying that the way the AEA is being used now, it's basically summary removal. You're just snatched up and deported, no chance to fight back, no hearing, nothing. And that's a huge problem. He even said you have to be able to contest. Otherwise, anyone could be taken off the street.
That's a chilling thought, right? Just being whisked away with no way to challenge it. And then to make things even more complicated, you have the lawyers representing these Venezuelan deportees coming forward with their own allegations. They're saying their clients, these guys, they weren't in any gang, they hadn't committed any crimes. They were targeted, these lawyers claim, because of their tattoos.
Wow. Targeted because of tattoos. That's incredibly troubling.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's true, it raises huge questions about how we're even identifying who to deport. Are they just picking people based on how they look? It doesn't seem right.
It really doesn't. And Judge Boasberg, he didn't seem too happy about it either. He even said publicly that the government wasn't exactly cooperating with his investigation and that he's going to look into whether they actually violated his order to stop the deportations. So it's not over yet.
Not at all. And it adds another wrinkle to this whole story. The different versions we're hearing about Trump's role in all of that.
Oh, yeah. How at first it was all like, Trump signed the proclamation invoking the AEA. He's fully behind this. And then later he's kind of downplaying his involvement, saying it was mostly his Secretary of State and Senator Rubio pushing for it.
Right, like he was trying to distance himself a bit. But then in the same breath, he's vehemently defending the deportations, claiming these guys all went through this very strong vetting process. And they're all killers, murderers, really bad people.
So on one hand, he's saying, not my idea. But on the other hand, he's like, but they deserved it anyway. It's confusing, to say the least.
Definitely. It just adds another layer of complexity to this whole situation. But, to really understand what's happening here, we have to take a step back and look at the wider picture of deportations under the Trump administration. Because this isn't an isolated incident.
You're right. It's part of a larger pattern. And this is where things get even more interesting because some of the data might surprise you.
It definitely surprised me. You see, there's this perception that deportations just skyrocketed as soon as Trump took office. But if you look at the actual numbers from the Department of Homeland Security, well, it's not that simple. During Trump's first month, there were about 37,660 deportations.
Okay, that's a lot of people.
It is, but it's actually lower than the average monthly number during Biden's last full year in office, which was around 57,000.
Huh. See, that's what I mean. The data doesn't always match up with the narrative.
Exactly. It's important to look at the full picture. But here's the thing. The Trump administration, they've been very clear about their goal of increasing deportations. They made it a central part of their platform and their campaign promises.
So these recent actions, they could be seen as part of a renewed effort to fulfill those promises. And it's creating this huge conflict, right? The administration trying to push forward with these deportations, and the courts pushing back, questioning the legality of it all.
Exactly. It's a power struggle playing out in real time. And on top of that, you've got this other development, which adds a whole other layer of concern. According to the Indian Express, the Trump administration pretty much gutted the civil rights branch of the Department of Homeland Security.
Wait, the civil rights branch, the very people meant to be overseeing these immigration policies and making sure everything's being done fairly.
That's right. And the timing of this, well, it's pretty suspicious. It's happening right when this whole deportation controversy is blowing up. So you have to wonder, are they trying to remove the very people who are supposed to hold them accountable?
It's like, are they trying to avoid scrutiny? It's definitely not a good look.
No, it's not. And when you put it all together, it paints a pretty troubling picture. We're seeing a head-on collision between the executive branch and the judiciary, a battle over how far they can go in enforcing immigration laws, the use of this ancient Alien Enemies Act, the concerns about due process being completely ignored, the potential targeting of people based on nothing more than how they look. It's all very worrying.
It really is. It feels like we're at a turning point where the basic principles of our legal system, things like due process and the right to a fair hearing, they're being challenged. And for our listeners out there, especially those of you who are studying these issues for exams, trying to understand how our government works, how the different branches interact and hold each other accountable, this is a case study you really need to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This situation is a textbook example of the complexities of governance. And it raises some really tough questions that go beyond just immigration. We're talking about the balance of power, the limits of executive authority, the role of the courts in protecting individual rights. These are issues that affect everyone, not just those directly involved in this deportation situation.
So here are some key takeaways for you to think about. The fight between the Trump administration and the courts over immigration, it's escalating. The use of the Alien Enemies Act, it's incredibly controversial and raises huge questions about whether they're overstepping their authority. And then you have the whole issue of due process being ignored, people being deported without a chance to defend themselves. These are all crucial issues that have far-reaching implications.
And one thing I really want you to ponder is this. What happens when a law that was created for a completely different time period for wartime is suddenly dusted off and used in a modern context in a way it was never intended for? What does that mean for the future of our legal system? What does that say about the balance of power?
Really important questions. And how does this all impact how the world sees the U.S., especially when it comes to issues of justice and fairness in our immigration system? It's a lot to think about.
It is, and we hope this deep dive has helped you understand the complexities of this situation a little better.
If you found this discussion helpful, please do like and subscribe to the deep dive. We really appreciate your support.
And if you have any questions or thoughts on this issue, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation.
And don't forget, all the information we talked about today is based on the reporting from the Indian Express. They did a great job covering this story. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.